Welcome to, thanks, Courtney. Welcome to the Healing Our Highways informational webinar. I'm Marian Liu, Director of Arts and Culture here at Smart Growth America. As you just noted, we'll be recording this webinar so that we can post it on our website along with an FAQ that will include the questions and answers from today and a few others that we've received. Next slide. So the agenda for today is as follows. I'll be providing a brief background of Smart Growth America and what we do. And then I'll pass it to my colleague Heidi Simon to share some of the research and reporting, particularly our Dangerous by Design report that Healing Our Highways is a response to. And I'll explain the goals of the program as well as details about what's included and how the program will work. And then I'll pass it to our special guest for today, Alfred Thuo, who is an artist, architect, and advocate, to share some ideas for artists and cultural workers who are thinking about applying. And then finally, I'll go over the application and selection process and criteria before getting to Q&A. So throughout this process, or throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function. We will try to get to all of them during the webinar, but if we can't, we will do our best to respond in the FAQ that we are going to post tomorrow. Next slide. So Smart Growth America is a nonprofit organization, and our North Star vision is a country where no matter where you live or who you are, you can enjoy living in a place that is healthy, prosperous, and resilient. And the way we do this is through technical assistance, advocacy, and thought leadership to realize that vision of livable places, healthy people, and shared prosperity. Next slide. Our programmatic priorities are climate change and resilience, advancing racial equity, and healthy communities. Next slide. And we're a bit unusual in that we're an umbrella organization of several different programs and initiatives. Some of you may be familiar with, particularly familiar with Transportation for America, where most of our arts and culture work has historically been housed. But we also include other programs, including the National Complete Streets Coalition, the State Smart Transportation Initiative, Form-Based Codes Institute, and Locus. So our work has a great variety and breadth to it. And hopefully you'll get familiar with that if you're not familiar with it already. Next slide. And today I have the honor of being joined by my colleague Heidi Simon, Director of Thriving Communities at Smart Growth America, and Alfred Thuo, who created the beautiful series of illustrations that you may have seen that are meant to provide some visual inspiration for the transformative work we're hoping to see and support through Healing Our Highways. Next slide. I wanted to acknowledge the generous support of our funders for Healing Our Highways, majority from Kresge Foundation, as well as a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. Next slide. So with that, to start us off with some background on our research that this program is grounded in, I want to introduce our Director of Thriving Communities, Heidi Simon.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me, Marian. I'm so excited to see this project get underway and really just can't wait to be inspired by the projects that we'll get to work with over the coming months. Next slide. So as Marian mentioned, the grounding of this program, or some of the inspiration for this program, comes from a report that Smart Growth America publishes on a regular basis called Dangerous by Design that looks at the pedestrian safety crisis in the United States. So I'm going to be talking a little bit here about what is in that report, what it tells us about what is happening in our communities, and hopefully encourage you to dig in more after the fact, but obviously here to take questions and be a resource now or after the webinar wraps. Next slide. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties, so 1 second.
Okay. 17.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. So unfortunately for many of our communities across the US, these images that you're seeing on your screen now of people trying to navigate unsafe intersections are their daily reality. It creates not only harm and risk for those who are walking, biking, rolling outside of a vehicle, but it also just really demonstrates and conveys the message that those who are not inside the vehicle are not a priority within our transportation system and within our communities. I would also argue that these scenarios and these environments are not enjoyable or safe for those inside vehicles. While they may see reduced risk from physical harm, the stress and the feeling of unsafety really is compounded in environments like what you are seeing on your screen here. Next slide. And those experiences bear out in the data. We are seeing that even when driving goes down, such as it did in the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, the deaths of people walking, biking, and rolling continue to grow, and they're growing at historic rates, unfortunately. And it's just, I think, speaks to the fact that even if we are making safety gains in maybe unique locations or for specific modes, that our transportation system really is dangerous by design. And we are seeing the effects of decades and decades of design and decision-making that have created communities where people are not safe, they don't have access to where they need and want to go, and they're not able to fully engage with their community. Next slide. And unfortunately, we also know that the burden of traffic violence is not bared out equally among all communities. So for example, people of color, particularly Native and Black Americans, are more likely to die while walking than any other race or ethnic group. And this is found year after year in the pedestrian fatality data. Next slide. We also know where these fatalities are happening. And like I said, they're not happening equally across the country. So we know communities and states that are seeing disproportionately high rates of fatalities for people walking, biking, and rolling. You see them, the most dangerous states highlighted here on the screen. It is not an accident, I will say, that there is a trend towards being in the South and Southeast of the United States. It really speaks to the way that we have designed our communities, the way that we have decided where to put things like housing in comparison to school or work or grocery stores or healthcare. And it really speaks to the way that we have forced people to be in automobiles if they wish to enjoy safe travel, even when an automobile might not be accessible or a choice for them in that moment. Next slide. We have even gone deeper into the data to find the top 20 most dangerous metropolitan areas for pedestrians. I believe this is the target area for the program that we are here to discuss today. So this hopefully is a slide that you can screenshot or bookmark. You can also go to our Dangerous by Design website, and all of these graphics are available there in the report as well. But you will see that obviously where there are the most dangerous states, there's also the most dangerous metropolitan areas for people walking. Next slide. Something else that we know and that we believe in strongly at Smart Growth America is that while these deaths are occurring on a daily basis, at an average of over 110 people a day, these deaths are also preventable. They are something that while we might accept them as the cost of doing business for our transportation system, we do not have to, and that we have the knowledge and the will to change it. We can see better results, and we can see a better transportation system that meets the needs of all community members. So just some things to help demonstrate how these deaths are preventable and how we know that. We are unique in the US in terms of our pedestrian fatality rates, as well as the increases that we are seeing. We're actually one of the only developed countries in the world that saw more deaths occurring in 2020. And while walking has increased everywhere in the US, whether that be for transportation, recreation, or physical activity, we've really only seen it lead to a major increase in deaths in certain metro areas. So like I said, speaking to that map, it's not happening equally across the US. Fatality rates have increased the most on average in metro areas that are already more deadly. So we know that the deaths are being compounded, and had lower shares of people walking to work before the pandemic. And finally, we know that while arterial roads make up only 15% of all the roads across the US, there are 60% of pedestrian deaths occur, and 60% in urban areas. So unless you can make the case that people walking in rural areas are doing so more safely than those in urban areas, this is not a matter of human behavior, but a matter of the choices, decisions, and realities that we have made through our systems and in our built environment. Next slide. One of the main elements that we speak to here at Smart Growth America when we talk about this dangerous by design is how the built environment contributes to the risk and harm of people walking, biking, and rolling, and really all people traveling in any mode. And one of the things that we like to do is really dig into what that looks like in practice. So you'll see here how, for example, this dangerous road in Memphis, Tennessee is really encouraging unsafe behavior, both on the part of drivers as well as people walking and biking, how it enables space for speeds to reach, or for cars to reach unsafe speeds by allowing them to move quickly and without distraction, and how it just really forces people into a situation that is unsafe. Next slide. And finally, while I think we know that Smart Growth America focuses on transportation safety through the report Dangerous by Design, safety is not the only indicator of what happens when our communities are not designed for all modes in a way that is safe, accessible, and convenient. I am going to share the information on this screen, which speaks to transportation and climate, but there are links between transportation and health through things like physical activity and social engagement. There are things like transportation and the economy through the use of local businesses and local business activity. But when it comes to climate, we know that complete streets, which is an approach that addresses traffic safety, reduces emissions. They create more green spaces and they protect existing natural spaces. And so just as a way to think about this, in 2023, natural disasters resulted in almost 500 deaths and cost communities at least $92.9 billion, with 28 weather and climate disasters known in 2023, and that number is growing. If we really are serious about addressing climate concerns and preparing communities to be resilient in the face of extreme climate events, mode shift, or moving people out of cars and into transit, walking, biking, and other forms of active transportation not only needs to be part of the strategy, but really needs to be at the heart of the strategy as we think about how communities are going to face the uncertain future that we are seeing happen across the globe, but especially here in the US. And with that, I will hand it back to Marion.
Thanks, Heidi. I think it just reveals everything you've shared, just reveals the gravity of what we're experiencing and what we're facing. And so I am going to speak next slide, please, about our program goals and how this is related to what we're hoping to achieve through healing our highways. Next slide. So the goals for healing our highways are to generate creative ideas and activities that build knowledge, connection, and power within disadvantaged communities most harmed by transportation systems and climate change. You saw this in some of Heidi's slides. The statistics on who our transportation systems are most harming, as well as the connection, how climate change is exacerbating that harm. And we also want to equip artists, culture bearers, and culture workers who are deeply rooted in these communities with knowledge and familiarity with these systems, these policies, and processes as well as building community knowledge and power through art and culture to sustain long-term systemic change, particularly when it comes to our transportation and climate systems and sectors. Next slide. And so I'll be discussing some of these program benefits. And so, you know, if you were selected, these are the things that you would receive. Next slide. So we will be selecting, I know this question has come up already, the question of how many awards will there be and what do these awards entail? So we will be selecting 3 teams led by artists, culture bearers, or culture workers to receive $10,000 each. Teams will also, in your application, if you've looked at the application, you may have seen that we're asking folks to submit a proposed budget. It doesn't obviously have to be final in any way. We just want to see how you'll be allocating this amount. You'll also be receiving $1,500 per community engagement stipend. And honestly, to be honest, it will just be, you know, $11,500 that you'll receive, and we're not going to be requiring that you spend the money in any sort of way. We just want to make sure that you're thinking about how you're engaging community members, how you're working with them, how they're being involved. So this is a suggested amount, but it's flexible. You'll also be receiving technical assistance from Smart Growth America and Dangerous by Design. Heidi can speak more about this if you know, there's any specific question on this, but we're running right now a Dangerous by Design technical assistance program as well. And so folks who are selected for this Healing Our Highways will also be able to participate in some of the offerings through that technical assistance program. You'll also be receiving specific technical assistance from an organization called Democracy Lab South. And this is specifically around community and cultural organizing and movement building, as well as strategy and coaching. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the following slides. You'll also be receiving photographic documentation of the project. So we will be hiring a photographer to work with you to document your project, as well as ongoing project management assistance from me and our arts and culture team. Next slide. So Democracy Lab South, as I mentioned, is an organization that we are partnering with to provide teams with support and coaching on community organizing, cultural organizing, and movement building. Next slide. They're a team of 3 organizers with extensive experience in movement and power building, narrative shift, and environmental justice. And our goal in working with them is really to assist our teams, the artist teams, in strategizing around sustainable long-term social change. Next slide. So they'll be providing a cohort training, so training as a group, and then trainings and coaching to each team in these areas: power mapping and identifying and transforming systems of power and oppression to achieve social change, integrating organizing strategies to shift policies and practices to create power and collective liberation, and cultural training around climate advocacy. So providing artists with tools to understand hidden systems and power structures to create change. Next slide. And so how this works is that following the selection process, our staff and Alfred will meet with each team to discuss and refine their proposal, including getting more specific around the budget and timeline. And then we'll be signing a memorandum of understanding with each team, and then teams will receive $11,500 in a one-time payment. And then technical assistance with Dangerous by Design, as well as our organizing technical assistance, will take place from April to June. And you'll be able, again, to select from the offerings through Dangerous by Design. And then the cohort will meet for 2 virtual sessions with staff and Democracy Lab South, and also receive one-on-one coaching and support with us. We're expecting that there's a quick turnaround in this. There's the public-facing activations will take place in June and August, and then we'll debrief with us and complete a brief final report and survey in the fall, and with concluding with a national webinar featuring all of the teams in fall of 2024. Next slide. And with that, I'll pass it over to Alfred, who will share some of his work and how it's informed the illustrations that were created for Smart Growth America.
Sure. Thank you so much. So I'm going to take you through a few examples of images to talk about how different types of images could be used depending on what kind of ideas you want to get across. So let's go to our next page. So the main purpose of bringing art into this city planning and street design process is to really use imagination to inspire, to give people a sense of how things could be different from what they are today and get them excited about it. So let's go through some examples. So one topic you may want to touch on might be culture and community, talking about the people in your neighborhood, the community they're part of, and the culture that comes from that, and how improvements to transportation and traffic safety can make that better. So you'll see here in this picture, we've drawn the picture as a perspective, so you can see the people larger front and center. Let's go to the next page. Yeah, perspective views can also be useful if you want to give people a picture of what things might look like. So here I've done a watercolor showing a street that's been narrowed, and then some of the extra space has been used for a wider sidewalk, for trees, or for bike lanes. And let's go to the next page. So another topic you may want to touch on might be climate action, and how climate change and things we can do to reduce pollution can also be related to transportation and land use. So in this illustration I did for Smart Growth America, I compare and contrast the status quo of rising temperatures, wildfires, sea level rise caused by carbon pollution to a better alternative where we have wetlands and more compact neighborhoods and public transportation. Let's go to the next page. Yeah, so that image, as well as this one, are done in what is called a 3D view. And I found that this particular type of image has worked really well if you want to provide a big picture, bird's eye view of all the different parts that go into something, whether it's a big complex topic such as climate change, or if you just want to look at a specific intersection, but there are many potential improvements that could be done to it. So let's go to our next page. One of the main topics of dangerous by design and how do we make these dangerous streets safer is this idea of complete streets, where instead of streets that only serve one type of use, which might be just cars going at high speed, you have streets that support vehicles, you have streets that also support pedestrians and bikes, as well as other uses that might not just be transportation, for example, meeting spaces or places for small businesses. Let's go to the next page. And this type of drawing I was shown on the previous page is what is more of a plan view. Plan views can be really good if you want something that is almost like a map or a blueprint, where you can easily point to things and say, this object is going to go in this place, it takes up about this much space, it should be next to this and away from that. So think about it as a roadmap almost. And we'll go to our next page. And of course, transportation is very closely related to land use. Land use is a very broad topic, but it also covers things such as city planning, zoning, and anything that has to do with what goes where. And in this illustration, we are showing both existing land use where you have a very large parking lot serving an empty retail building with a different land use that shows a building with stores on the first floor, people living above, and a bus stop at the bottom. Let's go to our next page. And this type of picture could be what I call an infographic. So infographics are where you combine an illustration, but then you also add in graphics such as lines and arrows, as well as text that can explain what this thing that you want to propose might be. So this is a really good way to take a complex or unfamiliar topic and present it in a way that's easy for somebody to understand. Let's go to our next page. And finally, another type of drawing is the cross section, where you get to see everything at ground level. And you can see here an example of similar idea of a street going from a street dedicated for car traffic to one that's more of a complete street. It's a great compare and contrast tool. And finally, let's go to our next page. In addition to drawings, some of you may also want to work with photos. So this is a edited photo that I did that shows just the impact of parking. So here I took a picture of San Francisco and showed how much parking spaces would be needed if we didn't have mass transit available. And this was used as part of a campaign to save transit funding in the California's Bay Area. Yeah, so I'm sure many of you have many other different styles of art and ideas out there. And that's really why we brought you all here, because I'm one person, but you have so many of your own ideas. And with all these ideas, we can really bring these ideas to the rest of our communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Alfred. Thanks for sharing some of those ideas and some inspiration for our applicants. So with that, we'll get to the nuts and bolts of things, of the application and the selection process. Next slide. So we've been getting some questions through the chat and Q&A, and also you may be familiar with the guidelines that have been shared on our website. But I know there's still lots of questions, which I hope to address in this section. And first we'll discuss the eligibility requirements around the place or the location of the project proposal. Next slide. So the project must take place along or call attention to a state-owned or managed road, arterial, or highway in one of the top 20 most dangerous states or metro areas that were identified in dangerous by design. And we shared 2 of those maps. Next slide. Actually, don't go to the next slide because I'm not done yet. But you'll see those 2 slides again. And the project must take place in a low-income neighborhood or community notable for its cultural heritage that is currently experiencing or at risk of cultural displacement or erasure and climate change. And the reason why this is so specific is because this is where, to be frank, people are experiencing the most harm. So in Heidi's presentation, she shared some statistics around this, and we, and she said that this is not happening by accident. This is happening because of choices, because of policy decisions, maybe political decisions, right? And it's exacerbating long-term racist and exclusionary planning practices. So this is why we are being so specific around the eligibility guidelines and requirements for this program. Next slide. And these, again, I'm going to share these 2 slides again, the top 20 most dangerous states, and next slide, top 20 most dangerous metro areas. And so with those are the 2 maps that we want you to pay particular attention to for this program. Next slide. We also wanted to share the eligibility requirements around the applicant teams. Next slide. So this grant is open to artists, and this is a question that came through earlier. This grant is open to artists, culture bearers, and cultural workers working as individuals, teams, or collectives. You do not need to have 501c3 status. And the team must demonstrate meaningful personal history and connection to the community. You know, I've seen, I'm sure some of you all on this call have seen teams that are not from the community working in the community and working on similar projects like this one. And so we want to make sure that the community is involved and that the artist teams are have close connections to the community. And, you know, this may be demonstrated in a variety of ways, you know, including but not limited to residency or affiliation with community-led and serving organizations. Next slide. And so eligibility around projects. When we are reviewing each application, this is what we're going to be looking at. Next slide, please. So the project must center the community's cultural identity, their needs and desires, and their power. The project must demonstrate community involvement and power building, cultural relevance, and creativity. So it's not just something that could, you know, take place anywhere, but it's something that we really want to be rooted in the community. And you know, with involvement from community members. And the project should challenge and upend current transportation systems and car-centric development that prioritize speed over safety. I think Courtney included a video that goes over the speed over safety principle that many of our transportation systems and places are designed around. And finally, the project should advance climate action and strengthen the community's climate resilience. Next slide. So when we're reviewing every application, these are the criteria. These selection criteria are the ones that we'll be using in our internal evaluations and discussions. Next slide. And it's kind of rehashing what I just went over, but here it is in one slide, right? So the place is this a state-owned or managed road described as dangerous by design in the top 20 most dangerous states or metro areas. Is this a low-income community notable for its cultural heritage that is experiencing or at risk of cultural displacement, erasure, and climate change? And then we're going to be looking at the team history and connection to the community. We'll be evaluating whether this project is focused on the community's identity, needs and desires, and power. Is the community involved? How is power being built? What is the cultural relevance of this project or idea to the community? And then the creativity of the idea. And we'll be looking at the extent to which the project challenges existing transportation systems and strengthens climate action. And finally, we're going to, because of the quick turnaround, we really want to look at the team and project readiness, as well as its potential for being an example, its potential for exemplary impact to build knowledge and power, in disadvantaged communities. Next slide. And to conclude, this is our overall program timeline, so you're aware of what's coming up and when. The application deadline is a week from today. We'll be reviewing the applications from the end of March through the end of February to mid-March. We'll be announcing these 3 selected teams the week of March 18th. Technical assistance begins in April. We're looking for activation and documentation over the summer, and then project evaluation and wrap up with a national webinar in September and October. Next slide. So with that, we'll take questions. Let me see if we have any that I haven't answered already. Okay, so I'm looking at the Q&A. Will grantees be awarded camera equipment to own or rent in addition to funds? No, we are not going to be awarding camera equipment. Like I said, we will be hiring photographers. definitely we would appreciate, if you're selected, we would appreciate any photographer suggestions. But we will not be granting a camera equipment to own or rent. If acceptable, the question is, would it be acceptable or competitive if the art focused on the people previously harmed by historic highway construction? For example, if the project is more people focused than infrastructure focused, absolutely. So yes, there are some ideas that have been shared, some example ideas that were shared on the call for ideas. And this is something that would absolutely be considered. It does not have to focus on the infrastructure itself, although, I could see how, yes, that would be a great project, but it does not have to be specifically focused on the infrastructure. It can be focused on the community. Is population or density factored in? Will rural communities be equally considered? Yes, and the focus is definitely on the arterials that are highlighted in the Dangerous by Design report. If your community has an arterial that meets those requirements and it's in those top 20 most dangerous states or metro areas, then yes, we will consider it. Could a master's student be the lead applicant? I think we're really looking for folks who are self-identified artists, cultural workers. So if you also happen to be a master's student, that would not disqualify you. Question from Jade. I am a South Side Chicago developer and want to know if you'd consider extending here. Possibly for future iterations, but I don't believe that Chicago or Illinois is one of the top 20 most dangerous off the top of my head. I don't think Chicago or Illinois are included. So not in this grant, but possibly in the future for sure. Courtney, do we have any other questions that I can answer? I guess we'll keep it open for a minute or two longer if anyone wants to submit any more questions. And again, we'll be taking all of these questions as well as the responses and adding them to the FAQ. We'll be posting this webinar on our website. And I'll just conclude then if we don't have any more questions. I wanted to thank you all for attending our webinar. I wanted to say thank you especially to our interpreters from Joyful Signing. And a reminder again that the webinar recording and the FAQ will be posted tomorrow and that the application deadline is a week from today. If there's anything we haven't answered or if something comes to mind, you can please email me at my email address, which is mlu, and I'll put this in the chat, at smartgrowthamerica.org. Oh, there's more questions. One more question. So the project is not necessarily focused on infrastructure. We can work with community. Can we, for example, focus on revitalizing the history and heritage of the place? So I don't really understand the last part of that. Revitalizing the history and heritage of the place. I think if you want to email me and we can discuss that further, I'd be happy to have that conversation. Definitely we want you to be working with community and involving community members in the proposal and the project. No, it does not necessarily have to be focused on infrastructure, but I think the understanding is that a lot of what the community may be experiencing or facing is going to be significantly impacted or related to the infrastructure. All right, great. I think that's it for now. Again, please feel free to email me. Thank you for being here. And with that, we'll end today's webinar.